Today we showcase 3 of the most annoying and broken tanks World of Tanks has ever seen, but what makes them so infuriating to play against, I guess there's only one way to really know, and that's watching them through their eyes. First up needs no introductions in World of Tanks. It is of course the Object 279E, and this is the tier 10 vehicle that we're showcasing. I'm sure you are well aware of how overpowered, how much armor this tank has. Of course, very little potential to hit a lower plate. The frontal weak points are almost non-existent, and the potential for block damage is super high. But the key thing that I find with the Object 279 is that it is just a dominant force within tier 10. But how does this actually fare when you're looking down the scope of this thing as opposed to being on the receiving end of the amount of damage that this thing can do to you? So first things first, you're seeing here that the Maus on the enemy team, the tier 10 heavy, that is supposed to have armor, just getting rinsed. And when you compare a Maus up against a 279E, the effective armor is probably way better with this Soviet heavy reward vehicle, of course, because you can't actually just get a tech tree vehicle with good armor. It has to be either a reward or of course you have to pay for it. So yeah, how fun. Now what you're seeing here is of course the damage output of the 279E. It's picked up 3,600, and this is one of the highest damage replays that we have available to us right now on World of Tanks. And it's because of this damage number and also the blocked that you can pick up with this vehicle, and like how annoying, to the point where like the enemy team will just pick other tanks to shoot rather than shooting the one directly in front of them because they have very little chance of penning. Now there are a few weak points of the 279E. If you do have super high penetration, you can pen the upper plate. You do also have 2 cupolas on the top of the vehicle which can be penned, but remember, trying to snipe a cupola on this sort of tank is a lot harder than trying to snipe the cupola of something like an E75 or maybe even some of the turret weak points that the Maus has, and that's why they are sent back to the garage a lot quicker than this thing will ever do. This tank obviously has 440 alpha damage for those of you that don't know, and it's because of this 440 alpha that mean that you can trade with a lot of medium tanks that have really no way of reliably penning you unless they're spamming heat rounds, and even then usually they're not going to be able to reliably pen to the point where you can't deal way more damage to them than they can deal to you. And I mean, even things like the Gorilla are finding it difficult to pen this vehicle, and especially like when you combine the fact that slightly higher on a ridgeline whereby you're making the angle steeper on the upper plate, yeah, it's just basically unpennable, and it also then reduces the chance of being hit in the cupolas. Now everyone knows about the side armor of the 279E being pretty trash. I mean, most vehicles will be able to pen this tank from the side. It is got pretty much paper on the side, but the whole point is that if a player that knows what they're doing and you keep your armor frontally, they're just gonna devastate you. It's certainly a very frustrating tank to come up against, and it's boring to come up against. I mean, if you're playing in a typical heavy tank, you have your traditional weak point. If you're in something like a Maus, what you find when coming up against this is that you can reliably take a shell of damage. You can reliably take a lot of shells of damage from this thing, since the heat rounds of course are perfectly balanced with I believe 340 heat pen, so you can go through most heavy tanks at the tier. They can't go through you. You also have a fairly reliable gun handling. You have okay kind of mobility. It's nothing outrageous, but it still isn't bad to the point where you're gonna really suffer all too much. That's why results like this happen. 10,900 damage, and why I just feel like the 279E really does detract from the main game and completely go against what everyone has learned throughout their time getting to tier 10, and then you end up with games like this where a player is able to pick up 12,000 damage, blocking not that much, but hasn't received that many hits anyway. And yeah, it's just one of those rather disgusting replays. If any of these vehicles make you even slightly annoyed, then take out your frustration on the like button of this video and check out some of the other content that we have on the channel surrounding World of Tanks, and hopefully you guys enjoy that and subscribe as well, as it massively helps out the channel. Let's get back into it. Now, we've seen what the Object 279 can do, but what about the Cobra. Now, a very interesting one to come in at tier 9, but there's a reason why it's here on the most annoying list. And that's because this tank has a ridiculous intraclip reload. It can do 490 damage per shell and has 210 pen, which when you add it all up can do 1960 damage, and it does it within a few seconds of firing the first shell. Now, innately that seems, you know, pretty broken, but remember that this tank is not all that is so annoying, because it does have a long reload. It, you know, doesn't have that much armor, so at least it's not as broken objectively as the Object 279E. But the thing about this tank is that makes it so annoying is that it can deal all of that damage really quickly, and it can farm your hit points, especially if you're playing a medium. And if this thing YOLOs you, you're losing a ton of hit points regardless of what tank you're in. The thing that I find most infuriating about this vehicle is this exact reason right here. I mean, within about 2.5 seconds, he's managed to take all of the hit points pretty much of the Carnarvon Action X, and I'm sure that the Carnarvon's thinking, yeah, maybe I made a misplay, maybe I didn't look over this direction, but I wasn't expecting to be pumped for literally my entire hit points in a tier 9 game. And that is really what is so infuriating, is that you can do pretty much everything okay, but if one of these just crops up and deals 1960 damage to you, with the Hesh rounds of course, then you're going to be feeling a lot worse for wear. And it's not like this tank is particularly slow, so it can surprise you, it can come out of nowhere, and it's going to take away a ton of your hit points. So yeah, one of the most annoying vehicles. And of course, here is the sight that the Cobra is going to love, the back end of a 703-2. And was that a tier 8 heavy getting full clipped? Not entirely sure that that's entirely balanced. Now, you're probably thinking that it's got horrendous accuracy and it's got horrendous aim time. Well, you'd be right on one of those things. The aim time kinda sucks. I mean, it has 3.6 seconds aim time, which is one of the worst, I would assume, in tier 9. Of course, you can fact check that. You guys know 3.6 seconds is a hell of a time, especially when you're outputting damage at 1.5 inch-a-clip reload, meaning that you're never really fully aimed when you do fire your second or third shell consecutively. But what about gun depression? Surely it can't have a good amount of gun depression, since it's supposedly one of these like fast agile tanks that's just going to rock up, it's going to deal the damage hopefully into the back of vehicles and not be that flexible when it comes to the gun handling and stuff. Well, nope, it gets 10 degrees of gun depression, because brilliant idea. And of course making it more annoying when it crops over a ridge just slightly, showing only the slim pixel of the top of the tank, and then pumps you for full health without basically being able to reliably hit it back. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to say that the Cobra is the most overpowered tank, it just is surely one of the most frustrating when it crops up out of nowhere, when maybe you haven't realised that there's one in the game, and it just takes away all your hit points. It's just tanks like this that are super annoying, and ones that, you know, can YOLO you with very limited kind of negative impact towards their own game. So how can a tier 7 be on this list? Well, it's because of the fact that this is a vehicle that even Wargaming thought was a little bit too strong within the game, and they of course removed it because it was too overpowered, or at least too strong in the game, and then they proceeded to sell it again in loot boxes and various things that were then like £100 or £150 for a tech tree premium that was available on the German tech tree in 2016, I want to say, somewhere around that era of World of Tanks. But of course now far more expensive, and Wargaming capitalising on the fact that this overpowered little rat, with preferential matchmaking of course being one of the vehicles that was introduced a long time ago, and with a camo that the TDs back in the day used to have, whereby, yeah, it's rather outrageous, and that means that this tank can basically remain undetected for 99% of the time when you use it correctly. If you're using bushes, it basically becomes invisible, and that is the most annoying fact about this tank, or at least one of the big two. And then the second is that this tank has incredibly annoying damage per minute, to the point where it can reload in like 2 seconds, which means that you're able to dish out 135 damage off the top of my head, and can do it consistently throughout the entire game. And although it may have not that many rounds, I mean it's looking at about 60 rounds in the total, which means you can't deal all of the damage that you'd be expecting, you can still be an absolute nuisance. And you can see here, I mean, even the EOC Biss on the enemy team is struggling with trying to find this tank, because not only does it have the gun handling of a German vehicle, it has the camo that we've talked about, it has the damage per minute and the amount of rounds that it can fire in a minute being ridiculous, and then it also gets a very, very slim profile, to the point where trying to hit this thing is a pain in the backside. And then you combine that with the fact that this thing can go about 60 to 70 kilometers an hour when kitted out, dependent on your loadout, of course. Yeah, I mean, not entirely sure why Wargaming thought that this was okay, but apparently it was, and coming up against them 4 Shermans and of the like was perfectly fine. And you can tear through all of those vehicles, because the penetration values on your premium rounds are 194, which at tier 7 is not the highest, you know. We've certainly seen a lot higher penetration values on more recent premiums, but remember, if you are just a player that likes to fire a lot of gold, then this tank becomes incredibly annoying for everyone else in the game. And that is the ultimate point of showcasing this vehicle, and why it is one of the most annoying vehicles that World of Tanks has ever created. Now, if you do have any vehicles that you feel are far more overpowered, or at least would make it into a second part of this video, then make sure to leave them in the comment section down below, and I might very well add them into another video. So please do that. And of course, if you did find this video at least interesting to see the tanks in action, and give you some maybe tanks that you may want to pick up at a later date, maybe not the E25 because it's ridiculously overpriced and probably isn't worth it for 99% of players, either way, still a fantastic one to showcase, and hopefully you guys once again did enjoy. Make sure to like and subscribe, and maybe I'll even throw in a free fire on the next vehicle you hit.